I gave Marshall Mathers, by the way, the link to come in, but he's not joining. By the way, Marshall is the Muslim friend of mine, but he's wanted to say, quote, cutting a wife's head for trying to rescue him is commanded by the God of the Old Testament, and bear in mind that Jesus is that God. I would like to know, how is that a reasonable reason to cut her head off? So let's go ahead and go to the verse that you did pull up. You pulled up Deuteronomy 25, verse 11 to 12. Let's pull this up for everyone to see. Deuteronomy chapter 25, verse 11 and 12. When men strive together with another, and the wife of the one draweth near for to deliver her husband out of the hand of him that smiteth him, and putteth forth her hand, and taketh him by the secrets, in other translations, like the Holman Christian Standard Bible, says grab his genitals, because the particular Hebrew word there is mabut. I find that funny. It says mabush. That's literally the Hebrew word, by the way. Mabush. So taketh him by mabush, then thou shalt cut off her. And here's where he kind of got deceitful here, because no matter how, because he kept saying cut off the head. This says cut off her hand, not head. Thine eye shall not pity her. So what's happening here is the issue of the cutting of the hand is due to the grabbing of the testicular area. And I remember actually reading or seeing this in a documentary series that occurred on, like, it was called Weird or Awkward Moments in the Bible. And you got to admit, when you read this, you got to wonder, what is the motive? What is the reason for this? For number one that I'm going to put out there is that this is God's law, and God is able to do as he pleases in decreeing certain laws to be for us to follow. Now, as far as these whole thing, notice that taken by this, Gil comments that says, in Hebrew, his shameful parts, which through shame are hidden, and modesty forbids to express in proper terms, and such is the purity of the Hebrew language that no obscene words are used in it, for which reason, among others, it is called the holy tongue. This immodest action was done partly out of affection to her husband, to oblige his antagonist to let go his hold of him, and partly out of malice and revenge to him, to spoil him and make him unfit for a generation, and therefore was to be severely punished. So in other words, was engaging in basically a form of seduction and lust when this occurred, to oblige the antagonist to let go, and partly out of malice and revenge to spoil him. So in other words, being defiled. And because of that, then the punishment was to then cut off the hand, which was the one that touched and defiled that. So in other words, to get rid of that which was considered at the time in the culture unclean. So, he's talking about all this sort of stuff. And for some reason, he's saying, how is that reasonable? I'm saying, again, let God be God. And by the way, Marshall, that wasn't the King James that I did read. I mostly just read the King James. The only time I went to the other translation is when I was trying to show that particular word, mabush, mean in other translations. So, and he says, of course, that this apparently contradicts the so-called loving God. This does not, because it doesn't say that God is only loving, but that God is also a God of wrath in other verses. And also that we see within this passage that if you want to look at this clearly, notice that this is a Muslim saying, what kind of God is this that's so loving and all that commands this or has this be something that is allowed or an order? How is this reasonable? Well, again, in Islam, isn't that part of the Sharia? And I can go to the hadith from Muhammad that talks about cutting of the hand. In fact, there's even Muslim scholars that point that out, like even Yasser Qadi, who is not for doing that in America, which he lives in, but says that, yeah, that's how the early Muslims did it. To then, you chop off the hand, and because of that, it's like there's a Quran verse that says to cut off the hand, but the hadith helps you to figure out, how not to, basically says you don't chop off both of them. There has to be a specific one, and the hadith help with that. For example, you have let me see here if I can pull this up and it'll come up. Let me just pull this one up. This comes from Sahih Bukhari, from the Muslim sources. Let me just pull this up. So again, remember cutting the hand off. Right here we have from Sahih Bukhari, even in the Arabic, so no one can say I'm taking this out of context when we're not allowing the original language to be used. The narrated Aisha, which was Muhammad's young wife that married at the age of 6 and consummated the marriage, in other words, had sex with at the age of 9. The Prophet said the hand should be cut off for stealing something that is worth a quarter of a dinar or dinar or more. So in other words, if a person steals something that is worth of a quarter of a dinar or more, then by that ruling, hand should be cut off. And anyone within that Sharia law that is of that jurisdiction that says, okay, we should follow this, hey, you can't get onto them. You can't complain to these guys for doing it, which this law is being done today. And according to Muhammad, the prophet that is used here, he was okay with that. So let's be consistent here. If you're going to have a problem with a particular verse in which a religion is used, I mean, I'm sorry, but your own hadith itself says, I, Muhammad, cut this person's hand off, cut this woman's head off or hand off if she steals. So there you go. And of course
that makes so much sense of what happened to Jasmine and Aladdin.
Exactly, because that was in the Arabic area. But yeah, like and then of course Marshall's replying saying, well, there are fabrications within Bukhari. I can tell you right now, find me a scholar of Islam or Orientalism that says that there are fabrications within Bukhari, one that is genuine and authentic, and I dare you to show me the data that proves it, because you go to the Isnad chains and follow the science of hadith. I've studied a bit of the science of hadith to understand this, and can show you that quote, if you were to go formulate the Isnad chain, they all go back according to Muhammad in the authentic Orthodox way of understanding how these narrations work. So all he's doing here is showing that he's ashamed of the words of his own prophet and that he doesn't want to deal with it.